Vinaka. Tonight we're having a conversation with the Minister for Women, Youth, Sports and Social Affairs from Kiribati. She is Minister Ruth Cross Kwansing, and she's been in Fiji for a very important meeting. Now, I won't go into what the meeting is about. I'll ask Madam Minister to do that for us this evening. Welcome.
Thank
Madam.
you, Lucy. Thank you very much. Nisambula Vinaka and Maori from Kiribati. I'm here for the Pacific Islands Forum Women Leaders Meeting. It's a space where all our women leaders or leaders of women's ministries from around the Pacific convene to talk about matters that have to do with all things to do with women, which is all things to do with development, families, gender, social inclusion.
Okay. Before we go into some of the outcomes and what happened here, Madam Minister, would you be able just to tell us a little bit about yourself and the portfolio that you hold in Kiribati?
Sure. I didn't know how far back you wanted me to go, but thank you for clarifying. So my mother is Kiribati Tuvaluan and my father is Australian.
Okay.
I grew up in Kiribati and prior to entering into government, I was in the development space doing a lot of humanitarian and development work. But thankfully now I'm able to represent one of the largest constituencies in Kiribati, which is South Tarawa, which is our capital area. So not only able to represent the largest constituency in Kiribati, but also as the Minister of Women, Youth, Sport and Social Affairs, our ministry also looks after the disability sector, the welfare program, churches and communities. Wow. So it's quite a large and diverse portfolio. Yes. But we recognize that it's all to do with human development, and in every sector and demographic in those portfolios are matters that as a woman are very dear. Everything from our faith organizations to CSOs to our elders, these are all very dear to women's hearts. So being able to represent and I guess shoulder the responsibility of those very important sectors for the nation is something that I feel immensely honoured and blessed, and sometimes very tired to be able to support through the work that we do.
You're very right in saying shouldering, because you champion it, but you also shoulder it, and then you get to carry the weight of the expectations and the plans that people look to you for solutions for. Madam Minister, I must offer here my congratulations to you on being elected to the UN Commission on the Status of Women. Congratulations on that huge achievement.
Thank you so much.
Could we just talk about how, what this means for you? It's a significant appointment. What does this mean for you? And, the work that you carry out in Kiribati, but also for the women of the region, of the forum.
Thank you. It's a tremendous responsibility, and it's something that, of course, it keeps me awake at night because as a new mantle, there's a really big journey ahead. I think securing this kind of seat, which I would say was absolutely, without a doubt, a miracle in terms of the work and the things that happened to allow it to become possible. But getting there is just the beginning of the journey. Once you actually hold that role, there's a huge responsibility that comes with it, particularly in the way in which Kiribati nominated or shared our interests, which was not just to represent Kiribati, but actually to represent the Pacific region. Yeah. And I was able to do that because as the Pacific Islands Forum champion for gender and social inclusion, that responsibility from the forum was something that I was able to take forward in our bid, for the seat in the Commission of the Status of Women. So that it's a responsibility and mandate that has been endorsed by the Pacific region already. And what this means is now Kiribati, and this is something that was actually endorsed as one of the agenda items that we brought forward today, was to actually solidify the endorsement of that request,
Okay.
that we could definitely have the coordination amongst ourselves here in the forum to support Kiribasa's seat, not just as Kiribasa's seat, but Kiribasa's seat for the Pacific region.
Okay.
And so what it means is that the conversations that are held in the multilateral space or the UN system,
Yes.
which is where essentially where all the decisions are made that affect not just the Pacific region, but the entire, but the world. That's where all, I guess all the negotiations and all the work is designed. And it's something that the Pacific has been absent from for, well, since the UN ever started.
Yes.
So Kiribasa's seat for the Pacific is the first time that the Pacific has actually had a voice within the UN Commission of the Status of Women system.
Well, it just sounds so huge. So I'm just gonna ask you on a personal level, how are you feeling about it? And I know you're ready, and I know you were made for this, definitely, just from the conversation that we've just had this evening. But how are you? What's your strategy?
Well, I'm already already getting emotional. Well, it's a huge responsibility. But notwithstanding, there's been a lot of miracles that have made it happen, right? And so when that happens, then I know that not only do I have the support of the Pacific region, but I've also got the support of our Heavenly Father.
That's right.
And with faith in Him, with trust in Him and the plan that He has, it's possible, right? And what that means is giving, the full weight of the need that we need to bring forward for the Pacific the attention that it deserves. And it's timely as well. I mean, we trust in the Lord's timing for everything, right? And the agenda for the next CSW meeting, which is CSW 71, is on climate and gender, right? So this goes right to the heart of the conversations that the Pacific needs to bring forward, because that's the nexus that we represent. So it's, the timing was amazing. And I have to share with you that there's a very special story in there also about Fiji's support and solidarity. And so just to give you a little bit of context, the reason why it's so difficult to get a seat on a UN committee is because there's a huge amount of lobbying that happens before the seats become vacant. And the lobbying means that the countries that are going to nominate themselves and support and endorse one another have already had these conversations behind the scenes. And it's usually the bigger countries that are able to negotiate and maneuver their way into these positions. And our smaller countries from around the world tend to struggle in that ability to negotiate. And it's got to do with the size of our countries and all of those matters. Now, what happened in this case is that Iran was actually nominated to go on, was one of the two countries that was going to take the one of the two seats that had become available. Now, Iran had already been ejected in previous years due to the conflict that is taking place in the region. And at the sort of 11th hour, we realized that Iran was one of the countries that had nominated to come back in. And so when we saw that, we thought, well, if they were rejected during a time of conflict, well, they're in full-blown war at the moment.
Exactly.
So it kind of surprised us to think that they were not had submitted a statement of interest to come back onto the committee. So with that knowledge, and I won't pretend that I'm very knowledgeable about these mechanisms, but with that little bit of information or that curiosity and confusion, which is why we did a little bit of further investigation. And we thought, well, it's not likely that Iran would get in, but if there isn't another option, then they would have to accept Iran's nomination and endorse it. And so, Kiribati at the 11th hour thought, well, this is a unique chance to come in and present another option to the members of the Asia Pacific group and give them another choice. And so we did, and we were able to do that. But what happened at the very last minute is we realized that Fiji had actually recognized the same thing.
Okay.
And so it turns out at the very last minute, Fiji and Kiribati had gone in, had nominated into the,
Okay.
for the role. The issue with that, and it all happened as it was about to
Yes.
close, is that you would then split the votes.
Yes.
So presenting another option is great, but presenting two other options creates the exact same issue.
Yeah.
And so Fiji, I suppose in a sign of Pacific solidarity, decided to withdraw its bid and allow Kiribati to go through. Oh, look at me, I'm getting emotional again.
I'm listening to you.
If there's a series of miracles, and that Pacific solidarity is one of them. So Fiji also was a big part of that decision to say we're going to allow this to happen by withdrawing. And so because of that, the members of the Asia Pacific group were able to choose Kiribati instead of Iran. And that way, that's how we get the seat on the commission.
It's a special bond in the Pacific, I guess. You recognize and says, push this forward, and all our support will go towards that.
That's exactly right.
You've been at this meeting this past couple of days. It's been a powerful meeting. We've just, we've heard from certain leaders about some of the things that were discussed, some of the things that were passed. If you could just, what were some of the highlights for you? What are some things that you now will take back to Kiribati, and some of the things that will help you and fuel you for what you will take to the UN body?
There are so many highlights because this is such a critical convening of women leaders, and we don't just come together and talk about women's issues. We talk about a lot of different issues. So the forum does present the agenda items which are aligned with the 2050 strategy, which we're all working towards. So we get to comment, we get to talk about the agenda items that are presented that are across the 7 pillars of the matters of which we're here to discuss, and it has to do with leadership, climate, gender, health, and early childhood development. Yeah. So we are able to come in here and make recommendations based on what we've experienced and what we'd like to see done differently. So apart from being able to spend time with all my colleague, ministers and get to know each other and sort of deepen our friendships and our regional ties, it's also the opportunity to do exactly that, to bring forward some really critical conversations, things that we've learned and observed and that we'd like to bring forward for the region to perhaps restructure the way that we're approaching these matters. And just to give you an example, climate finance is something that comes up, as a major issue, and it's a shared challenge. And one of the really critical points that Kiribati has been able to bring forward in this forum is not only to acknowledge that yes, we're all having the same challenge, but that we'd like to change it. We have to recognise that systems like the climate finance are developed by the multilateral system, and the ones who design the multilateral system are us, the leaders, right? It's designed to respond to our issues. And so we don't just get together and talk about why it's not working. We have to talk about what we think needs to be done to fix it. And so an example of an item that we've been able to bring forward and talk about today is to do exactly that, is to perhaps create a different vulnerability index that is specially connected to the special circumstances of the Pacific, and create a system where we can do the work and provide the reports that directly link the work to climate change, and do it ourselves, but then get that support reimbursed rather than having to design the concept notes to access the funds. The point is we do the work and we get the reimbursements that we need so that we can scale up the work that we need to do. And this allows us not only as governments to scale up the work, but it allows our development partners to scale up the work. It allows us to potentially access debt mechanisms, because it's not going into debt for a very long time. It's only for the purpose of doing the work and then having, again, the funds reimbursed once the work is done. That kind of re-engineering of the process is exactly what we can achieve in these rooms. The work is long, but the concepts can be brought forward for endorsement, right? And the endorsement process is you present an idea, and if it sounds good to everyone else, then it's a good idea.
Yes.
If you get the endorsement that you need, then it becomes a recommendation, and then it becomes something that we can take forward. And so the challenges that we have in the Pacific region on the front lines is exactly that, is that we don't have finance that can be responsive to the climate shocks and all the challenges that we're currently experiencing. So this is exactly the kind of exciting work that we can do in here.
Yes.
So it's not just that. We're able to bring forward sport for development as well. And again, bring our needs and come in and sort of re-engineer the way that we're doing them. So, and I think that's pretty exciting, right? We're not just here to keep repeating and reanalyzing the issues that we're experiencing. It's to design the solutions.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's interesting, and that's just so empowering to hear you say that. Perhaps just our final question this evening. Minister, you know, the Pacific is currently battling so many issues, one of them being a transnational crime, the influx of illicit drugs into our islands, and then you have the rise in HIV cases across, and then, you know, you have so many other things, and then you have the global fuel crisis. You know, for you, as a daughter of the Pacific, here at this powerful table, this seat, you know, going back home to Kiribati and taking this, you know, these issues with you to the UN Commission on the Status of Women, you know, how would you package it? What would you like to see for the Pacific that we all so dearly love?
Well, the problems that we have in the Pacific are not unique to the Pacific. So in these types of cases, when we're dealing with issues that are new to us but not new to the world, these are opportunities to go outwards and see what information and opportunities and knowledge is out there to bring back as solutions here, right? And that's what's so wonderful about those global conversations and the relationships that we're able to build in those space, because we're able to go and see what is being done out there, because they're not new issues, so they don't require new solutions, but they just require the political will to be able to tackle those issues. Now, I briefly mentioned sport for development.
Yes.
One of the reasons why this initiative is so important is that we know that when we have youth or people that are then starting to battle with addiction and challenges like that, what we know is that they just need other opportunities and other things to do rather than what they're currently doing. So when we talk about these initiatives, they're not separate issues. And we've seen sport for development successful in other countries. And we've seen those used as tools and mechanisms to re-engage youth and people, you know, through those activities, right? Because I'm pretty sure the case would be the same for Fiji as it is for Kiribati. But our youth who are athletes and powerlifters and engaged in all these activities, they don't want to drink alcohol. They don't want to touch kava. And why? Because they're taking so much pride in their, well, actually they're being so disciplined in what they're focused on. So we know that creating more opportunities for this is, and it sounds very simple, but that's exactly what our youth need, because when you're too busy doing useful things, then you have less time for the other things. You know, there's a saying that I think is as old as time, that idle hands make mischief.
Yes.
Right? And so with those, you know, with that knowledge in mind, we have local solutions, we have international solutions, but we can also, again, redesign the way that we are approaching things to consider all the problems and the social issues that we have and how they can be addressed through healthier mechanisms, and then design the work so that the political will is driven by the momentum created through the region, regional frameworks.
That's right.
Right.
make it work.
We do.
Make it practical and make sure it works. That's something that, you know, we usually hear at meetings such as this, you know, the practical solutions, you know, going back home, okay, how will the resolutions from here affect the everyday person? So I like the way you've mentioned that. Would you like to speak to that? Like, how would you, you know, how would you explain the decisions made here to a woman who would stop you on the streets in Kiribati to ask you, how does this affect me? How will this make my life a bit better?
Sure.
Before we end, sorry, madam.
Oh no, I'd love to. So I I used to be someone that was, doing grassroots initiatives,
Yes.
right? And when you're working on grassroots initiatives, you always need money. You need grants.
Yes.
And then when you're going to design something at that level, you need a framework as well. And so what inevitably happens is that when you start to do impactful work at a community level, you need a funding mechanism that's going to be able to support that work. Otherwise, you'll be doing this out of your own pocket. And you can't do things at scale when you're trying to operate out of your own expenses. What happens in these spaces is it starts to control how the funding is flowing, right? So, for example, if we want more funding for sport, where is it going to come from? Because there's not a lot of sport grants out there.
That's right.
Right? And so the grant system is driven by the multilateral system and the priorities that the region sets. It responds to precisely that. So if we are saying that health is a priority or NCDs, then that's how the system starts to flow. That's how our crop agencies like your SPCs and your SPREPs, that's where they start focusing their efforts. You come into this room and then you say, those are all still priorities, but this is a priority too now. We want to focus on sport. That then allows the agencies to start to reconfigure how they're designing their work. And then they start to seek the funding for that work. And that's where the framework comes from. And that's where the grants start to come from and how they flow through the system. Not only that, but they also support governments to be able to do that work. You have to think of the way the government's budgets are. It's a really big ship that is going in a specific direction. And it's like trying to move the Titanic to change the budget, right? Because they are very strict and they have to be because these are public funds. When you want to start getting funds to work differently, you need a lot of technical support to be able to build the case for investment. And so the conversations that we have in here, we're asking for the technical support to build the case for investment so that we can start turning the ship in a different direction, right? And we need to do it together. And that's the reason why the regional space is so important. Because we've all got the same problems across the Pacific, right?
That's right.
And so rather than trying to keep reinventing the process, we set the tone, we set the priorities, and then we all start working together to develop the best way forward for that. And that's whether it's in early childhood development or gender-based violence and all the various issues that we're having. This is how we restructure the work plan involved and the way the funding flows.
Oh, wow. I am so looking forward to seeing this evolve and just hearing more about your work, Madam Minister.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having this interview with us and for sharing a bit about your heart
Thank you, Lucy.
and the work that you're now going to take back to
Appreciate it.
Kiribati and to the United Nations.
Thank you so much.
That has been our show this evening. We have had the pleasure and the privilege of having a conversation with Kiribati Minister for Women, Youth, Sports and Social Affairs, and and she's just been elected to the UN Commission on the Status of Women. I'm Lucy Banuve, your host. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.